So
Welcome to Impact Travelogues by Harmony Inc. In Impact Travelogues, we cover stories of change makers. Today we have Ms. Rana Jebwala of SEWA Bharat. She is president of SEWA Bharat, and we are having conversation with her to understand SEWA Bharat's work and also how women entrepreneurs are doing at grassroots level. Welcome, Ms. Jhabwala,
Thank
for
you.
this conversation with us.
Thank you.
I wanted to understand what is the motto of SEWA Bharat? How did it all start?
Actually, SEWA Bharat is the one of the organizations in the whole SEWA movement. So we have a SEWA movement, and SEWA stands for Self-Employed Women's Association. So it's women who are self-employed in some way, and SEWA, as you know, means service.
Yeah.
So the two things combine. So SEWA was started actually almost 50 years ago. In fact, 50 years ago, 1972,
Wow, okay.
by Mrs. Ila Bhatt. And I joined 5 years later. I was studying. I was in college. Actually, I did my studies first year in Delhi University and then in the US. And then I joined SEWA. So that was about 5 years after it started. And so the SEWA movement started as a trade union for rights. But very soon we realized that these are very vulnerable women. Who are they? They are like street vendors, they are like home-based workers, people who do things in their own home. They are like people who go to farms and do agriculture labor, small farmers, all these type of women. And of course, many artisans, weavers, embroiderers, stitchers, all that. So we realized all that, and given that, you know, rights was very far for them. There were no laws, nobody to protect them. So we realized that development has to go along with it, and we started forming cooperatives and companies.
Okay.
SEWA Bharat was started some years later because this experience was in Gujarat. And then SEWA Bharat, so this was made to bring the experience to other states.
Right.
So as of now, we have about 2 million women. And when I say 2 million, we actually have 10 million because 2 million have paid their dues. But then they involve their whole family. So you can say it's many more.
Yeah.
But 2 million dues paying members who are in 18 states. So SEWA Bharat's role has been to spread this movement throughout India.
Right.
So that's the thing. And the movement, what is it about? It's focused on women in the economy and at the base of the pyramid. So they're basically women in the informal sector. So in the informal sector, what do they need? They need some form of what we are nowadays calling empowerment, which means they need self-reliance, or to rely on themselves, to come into collectives also, to collect together, to form groups, which makes them much stronger. And then they need to come into the mainstream of the economy.
Right.
So that's actually what SEWA Bharat is about.
That's great. So you're talking about coming to mainstream of the economy. You did mention about forming of producer companies, you know. So getting these women together from the informal sector, isn't it challenging for you? And how do you form these producer companies?
Actually, you know, when we first started, there is a difference between, say, a producer company and a cooperative. So when we first started with cooperatives, because the whole idea is that they should cooperate.
Right.
So if they come together and cooperate, they can pool their resources, they can pool their financial resources, their labor, and then they, you know, formalize. And once you're somewhat formalized, you can come into the economy in a much easier way. For example, we were talking earlier about the private sector. Now, it's very difficult for, say, a big company to reach out to 1,000 women or 500 women. But if those 500 women come together in some way and form either producer company or a normal company or a cooperative, then they can work directly with such organizations.
So how often these workers within these companies are trained or skilled? Because
Yeah.
as I understand, when you're reaching out to a private sector or even to the retail market, quality becomes very
Very
imperative.
important.
So how often do you skill or reskill these companies as an organization?
Uh, Actually, I'll just go back to your previous question a little bit. You asked how do you bring them together? Actually, as I said, we start as a union, which means we start organizing them, we have them in meetings, we have groups. And at some stage, they only realize that it's important for them to come together. And that's the stage where we start talking about a cooperative or a company. But you're totally right that skilling is very important. And it's not just the skilling, say, in, as you were saying, quality. That's very important, and I'll come to that. But also when they come together, they're no longer individuals. So they have to work as a company.
Right.
So they have to understand too many things. They have to understand what are compliances, for example. That you have to make your returns, that you have to file your returns, that you have to report to the government or to whichever is the authority. And then at the same time that you have to understand profit and loss, that you can't let this company go into loss. So they have to learn how to work as a joint endeavor. And since they are not very literate, most of them, now of course, fortunately, literacy has gone up. But earlier, they were not able to even understand how a company's or a cooperative's accounts work. So that training has to be done. Then they become members of the board. So how does a board work? You have to have a meeting. How does a meeting work? So one has to go at a very basic level and slowly, keep on doing that training. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that when they formalize and come into a different market to which they are used to, they, just to give you an example, we have some very skilled embroiderers. Or I'll give you another example, which is a very good one. When we started in Lucknow, women were doing chicken work for generations. But because they were paid so low, their chicken work had become very rough. And, the contractors also would tell them, you do it in one day, you do so many things, and we'll give you only so much money. So naturally, they would do it fast, so it become very rough. So then we had to retrain in a way that go back to your original. So there were few women like that. So they then learned how to do the chicken work well, and then they trained. And then they found that there was quite a different market with a much higher pay, capacity to pay. So that's very important, that artisans have been downgraded. They need to be upgraded again, brought back to their traditional skills. And yes, that has to be done very often. We also find that, it's not a very good idea to take somebody who doesn't know the skill. In our country, there are so many people who already have so much skill. So one needs to just adapt that skill to the market.
So you, as an organization, you have a pool of trainers who have these expertise?
We do. And so, we do have them go. But, it's not only artisans. It's also, say, in the agriculture field. Let's take that as an example. In the agriculture field, women don't know the latest techniques. They don't know what seeds are good, what are not good. They don't know the latest market. So all that training also has to be done. We don't really keep such a huge batch of trainers. What we try to do is bring in outside resources.
Okay.
So, for example, we have this company called Ruab.
Yeah.
And we are working with Dastakar, which is,
Leela
Tayebji, who has focused on only artisans.
Yeah.
And she's guiding us about how the training should be done, how the designing should be done, what is the market, and so on. So it's better to go for, much better outside resources than try to make your own very big team.
Sure. No, completely agree. And in that process, especially aspects like, profit making, pricing of product,
Yeah.
do you see somewhere the role of Indian corporations, or the Indian companies who can pitch there? Do you see that happening?
I think the companies have a very important role to play. especially if they, are seriously interested in this sector and bringing them up. They have a role in many different ways. One is in teaching people how to be profit oriented. And I'll give you an example of that. We worked with ITC in Bihar, where they helped us to set up a agarbatti unit. But that agarbatti unit, the people, of course, were the grassroots people. They didn't, they were not very quality conscious. They were not profit conscious. They were not conscious about saving money. They were not very conscious on how do you report, a day by day. And all that was taught to them. And so, they were able to run this cooperative. And unfortunately, the whole agarbatti market changed. So that was a different thing. But taking those skills, now they're able to run other things. Right. So that's one important skill. Another thing is they can help us provide a market. So, for example, earlier, of course, now with the COVID, international markets are finding it difficult. But we worked a lot with some of the bigger clothing companies who would give us orders. Of course, through their main contractor, but they would give us orders. They made sure that the orders came to us, so that they knew that that it was actually reaching these artisans. So, if these type of cooperatives or companies can become part of the supply chain, right. And if the bigger company, the corporate, actually focuses on bringing them into the supply chain and helps them to overcome many of these issues, like I was telling you. Yeah. How do you calculate profit? How do you manage quality? How do you manage timeliness? That's another big one. Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of a teaching experience as well as a commitment to buy from them.
Right. So since you're mentioning about, the producer companies, Ruab has been profitable, or any of your producer companies have been profitable? If yes, how do you use those profits?
Ruab has been profitable at this time. Actually, it was quite profitable 2 or 3 years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago. Then it got some very bad management and went way down. And now, interestingly, during the COVID, it pivoted and started making masks and has become very profitable. Now when the mask market is going down, then again it has. What do they do with the profits? There are two things. One is it's very important to expand. So one of the issues that these companies always face is, should we bring in more and more people? Should we try to reach out to more and more women? Or should we just remain at a certain level? And so far, they have said that let us try and expand. So some of it is investment in order to expand. And some of it, we usually try to give bonuses. So at the end of the year, like Diwali time or whatever time, we give some form of bonus.
Yeah. So as you know, in international markets and now in India also, there's a lot of talk about fair wages and fair trade practices. Since you mentioned about bonuses, how do you see that? Do artisans or the weaver community whom you work very closely with as part of producer companies, when they earn their profit, or do they know about the pricing of the product? Do they really get those wages? How do you communicate that to
as I told you, the board of these companies consist of these women themselves, and they're elected. And their main task of the board is to communicate, is to be the link between all the other women who do the work for the company and the company itself. Yeah. So the whole issue of pricing is very important, because especially if you're working on, say for example, if you're working on these clothing products, they're fashion products, they change very often. Right. Sometimes you get something which you can actually, where the rates are good. Sometimes you get something where the rates are very poor. But I think for the women, continuity is more important than always getting a high rate. So yes, pricing is sort of the main thing that the women have to work out. And it needs to be explained again and again. One of the things we always do is make sure that the women also come for the negotiations with the company, and also, you know, often have exhibitions, so they only go and sell, and then they can talk directly to the consumers and understand, you know, what kind of prices are there in the market, and also understand what kind of preferences are there in the market, color-wise, design-wise. So.
Right. And so let's say if they know about, if they go to, you also have Anubandh as a site where you have a group of your products present online, and there's a market for that. Let's say if a lady from a producer company sees that the stall is, let's say, for an X amount, or $3,000 or something.
Yes.
And will she will she get the similar kind of wage, or how does that work out? You know, from pricing of that particular product to ultimately what she gets as a wage. So how does that mechanism work in SEWA Bharat?
It's, you know, again, Anubandh is a very new experience, so I'm not going to take that, but take Ruab, which is an older experience, because Ruab does its sales, it also has its website and so on. I think like in any other company, you have to work out what are the different costs. Because what the woman produces is one cost, but then there's the cost of materials, there's the cost of transport, there's the cost of all the people who are working in the company, etc. So I think those costs have to be factored in, and usually I don't know how much profit margin they try to charge. I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but I'll give you an example. In Ruab, there's a very large number of women from Delhi who are involved in it, or who are members of it, but their skill is not that high. So I think Ruab takes work for them, and there's zero profit margin in that. It just about covers costs. Whereas in other places, like say weaving for in Bihar or in Bengal, they are able to add some profit margin because those products are higher value and better skilled. So, you know, they have to keep balancing. Like any company, they have to keep balancing. Your question is right, how to convey that, that, you know, it's not an arbitrary decision. And that's very important. That's why a lot of member education of the women, of the board, has to continuously go on.
Yeah, it's also about transparency, because that's a benefit. If you are the one who is making or developing it, you should know that why X product is of so much high value.
Exactly.
And why you're getting that amount, and there are associate costs associated.
Exactly.
So that understanding needs to be there with the one who is producing it also, right?
It's there, but you know, the other thing, of course, is that they also know what the market is. No? So, say a weaver is getting so much from Ruab, but he knows or she knows that in the market she would be able to get less. So always these cooperatives or companies are giving more than what that same person would get in the market. So they don't measure so much ki how much did my product, it's more ki what do I get from this contractor, what do I get from that contractor. And they also are very concerned about continuity. So, you know, if you are able to give work for 2 days and then not for 2 weeks, then they don't want to work with you, even if you have a much higher rate. Then they would rather work with somebody who has a low rate but can give work every day. So we have to also balance continuity versus rates.
Did COVID impact their work?
COVID, I told you, Ruab, especially in Delhi, their masks came. So in fact, it was a huge lifesaver for them, for the women, because there was no other work. Men didn't have work, other people didn't have work, and only they had work. So that was a big lifesaver. Most of the other artisans, it's impacted very badly. The weavers has been very badly impacted because nobody is buying a cloth. And that's why actually we started Anubandh, just to connect them to some consumers who would be able to buy. The embroiderers have been very badly affected. All the skilled workers in the fashion market have been very badly affected. People who make food products, not so badly, because food was going. In fact, there's one woman who's a pickle maker in Ahmedabad, whose business actually expanded during. So some women who are making some Ayurvedic medicines, their business expanded, but all the artisans did very badly. They're in very dire shape even today. So
then, are you looking at any alternate? Because these kind of given the kind of climate crisis which is there and all these pandemics, it's likely that we'll have frequently such kind of contrarian situation. And what is SEWA's philosophy, or what is your outlook on that? I mean, is there an alternate or a backup plan that you're thinking with regards to this particular community?
Artisans, up to now, and this is actually a kind of a crisis which has particularly affected the international market and the fashion market. I have not in my whole lifetime seen anything like this. I've seen many crises. There have been riots, there have been earthquakes, there have been cyclones, there have been storms, there have been floods. None of them has affected the consumer, the international consumer and the national middle class consumer like this one. And the artisan market was actually expanding, and it's still expanding. But so I don't think that one needs to think of alternatives for them. But there are many other places where alternatives are required. And I think you were asking about beadi work.
Yeah, correct.
And we have been working with beadi workers for a very long time.
Yeah, beadi work will eventually go down, because I see there's a pressure on companies that are producing tobacco also. And investors are asking them that this is not a good business, and especially under the ESG or the sustainability piece, which has really picked up last 2 years. Companies are under pressure of not to make products which are not viable and not healthy as such. So then in that sense, it will impact the beadi workers in case the corporates are not buying, or the retail market also goes down as consciousness begins. And then in that sense, possibly, what are some of the alternatives there that you recommend?
I mean, for one, the beadi market hasn't gone down, just for your information.
Right.
There's been an anti-tobacco movement for a very long time, as you know, and there has been a lot of pressure on the on the beadi tobacco employers. Market hasn't gone down that much, quite honestly. But what does happen is the market shifts. But for a long time, we have been thinking, what are the alternatives? And very interestingly, their daughters don't want to do that. They don't want to make beadis. So it's very difficult for somebody who has made beadis and that for the last, say, 20 or 30 years to pivot her work. Also, just for your information, of all the home-based work, the beadi earnings is the highest.
Oh, is that so?
Yes,
okay.
It's still the highest. But the daughters, what we find is that if we can invest in the next generation, send them to school, give them some other skill, then we take the family out of the beadi business.
Right.
The woman herself, she neither wants to move out, unless, of course, the beadi business closes down, in which case she has no alternative. But the daughters are, and we've seen a lot of that. A lot of families, the daughters have moved out, and the whole family has moved out of the beadi business.
Yeah, possibly skilling them on similar, initiatives like making them artisans, I don't know, of that region, or other trades which are more relevant to industry now. Because if you see, India Inc. is becoming very conscious about it, and under their CSR, or for that matter, even business-wise, they are looking at things like sustainable sourcing and all. In fact, just to share with you, SEBI has mandated companies under top 1,000 by market cap to have sustainable sourcing as a criteria, and they have to report on it. And this becomes like a big opportunity. So if this is an opportunity, how is SEWA Bharat looking to tap this?
The thing is, we have not, let me put it this way. We work a lot with corporates. We also supply wherever we can or wherever it's useful for them. And so far, it's been mostly under the CSR head, as you know, mostly under the CSR head. Under the sustainable business head, it's not something that companies have approached us for.
Okay.
So we don't have that kind of, rapport with them that here we are. And also, sustainability by companies is often interpreted in different ways. They interpret in environmental sustainability more than in social sustainability. Though I know there's an ESG, which is the social part is there.
Yes.
In many of our places, the diversity issue comes up a lot. That especially for women, are you employing enough women and so on? And there, we do have an advantage because all our people are women. But so far, we have not been contacted on the sustainability point.
Right.
It's mainly on CSR.
There's a message that if you would like to give to the corporation, because our impact travelogue is also towards a sharing of experiences of various social enterprises like
Yes.
SEWA Bharat, and what is your expectation of the India Inc. Given that?
I would like to say two things. One is that please make us, either our cooperatives or our companies, as part of your supply chain.
Right.
We can tell you what we are producing, but give us preference, because often we are not able to participate in the tenders that are put out. So make us part of your supply chain in whatever way is best for you. And secondly, help us with your know-how, which is the know-how of how to run a business.
Correct.
Because these women don't know how to do it.
Capacity building piece.
Capacity building piece, yeah.
Right. So two things. One is obviously making supply chain partners.
Yes.
And others building capabilities.
That's right. That's right. Those
So
are
then
the
in
two.
that sense they become business partners.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Rana Ben, for
I
joining
hope
us in
it was
this
useful.
conversation.
Yeah.
No, it was definitely a great conversation, and I'm sure that India Inc. will somewhere benefit out of it, and you will also possibly, we can have a mutual conversations.
Sure.
The idea is that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for coming, and lovely to speak to you.
Lovely to speak to you.
Yeah.